Welcome to Module 5, Part 2, Reason 2 for Vaping, Your Thoughts. So please, before you get going on this video, make sure that you did the exercise from the last video, okay? If you were resistant to it, you need to do it especially, because that means that your animal brain is fighting you on quitting vaping. Your animal brain will not want to change thoughts. It costs energy. It's uncomfortable, okay? Everybody has that part of their brain inside their head. That is why it's so important to actually do the exercises, because this whole entire program is learning how to overcome that animal brain, and that is the problem, okay? So make sure you do the exercise. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about some of the common unintentional thoughts or thought errors that people who vape often believe. And we're going to talk about changing those thoughts so they stop producing the mental, emotional withdrawal cravings and desire to vape. Remember that craving and desire are emotions caused by your thoughts that are not part of the physical withdrawal symptoms. People who do not vape do not think thoughts about vaping that make them desire it. Make sure you complete the exercise from the last video, okay, again, and let's get going on some common thought errors. Before we get going on thought errors, I want to add a quick note about willpower. If you are here, it is almost guaranteed that you've tried quitting in the past and you were not successful. This was most likely because you were trying to quit vaping by willpower. Quitting vaping by willpower is when you try to change an action without first changing your thoughts. It's similar to plucking a weed without getting to the root and then getting frustrated when the weed grows back. The problem with willpower is that it is finite. That means if you are resisting the urge to vape with willpower, you are always inevitably going to snap. Willpower does not work. The only time when quitting by willpower does work is when the person who is resisting the cravings accidentally and unconsciously changes their thoughts and beliefs about nicotine. So it's not the willpower itself that's worked, but rather the thought changes underneath the surface. Here's an example of trying to quit vaping with willpower. Circumstances: I decided to quit vaping. Thought: I'm giving something up. Feelings are cravings and urges to vape. And then what happens is when you have the feeling, with willpower, you're just fighting the feeling, okay? So you're white knuckling the cravings, trying to resist vape, FOMO thoughts, resisting urges to vape. I eventually snap because willpower is finite. Do you see the problem with this model? You are literally acting against your own brain. Then you are left to resist the cravings and urges that your brain is actually itself creating. The problem here is the thought, and the thought and everything underneath it is working against you. It's like you're literally in a tug of war with yourself. Even if a part of you wins, you lose by default. The thoughts are the seeds, and the actions and results are the plant. If you want to plant tomato seeds, you wouldn't expect watermelons to grow. But that's exactly what you're doing when you try to change your actions with willpower before figuring out what thoughts created them in the first place. It's much easier just to get to the right seed to begin with than to try to change a watermelon into a tomato. And here's an example of quitting once your thoughts are aligned with quitting, okay? So the circumstance is the same. I made a decision to quit vaping. It can be whenever. Yesterday, a week ago, 2 hours ago. My thought about that is the intentional thought: I know I can get through this, okay? So the thought is the problem and the solution. If I believe I can get through it, and I'm really focusing on that thought and believing it, I feel empowered. Because I feel empowered, I experience very mild withdrawal, because remember that you're not going to experience much mental emotional withdrawal when your thoughts are aligned, and the physical withdrawal is very mild. I let the urges be there without fighting them. We're going to talk about how to do this in the next section, and I hold firm to my decision. My result is that I get through the chemical withdrawal and I don't go back because my thoughts are aligned with the result I want. Okay? I know I can get through this equals a result of getting through this. For the next section, I'm going to first provide you with an unintentional thought that keeps people vaping and addicted to nicotine. Next, I'm going to provide you with an intentional thought and a model as a way to change your thought, your original one, okay? If you feel resistance to the new intentional thought, complete the PDF on the right of this video labeled Changing Unintentional Thoughts, okay? I put together a PDF. It's really amazing. It's very simple and straightforward. I even put an example already filled out of the PDF so that it gives you really good instructions on how to do it, okay? Now, the fourth part is that you need to do this for each intentional thought you have resistance to. And quite honestly, I would do this for all of your thoughts that you have listed from the last module that are creating you vaping, because that worksheet's going to help you actually take apart your thoughts and to change them, okay? Now, remember, you have an animal brain. It's really going to want to avoid doing this work. It wants to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and it wants to be conserving energy. So it'd much rather have you on the couch eating potato chips and vaping than doing this work. But just be mindful that you being vape-free is on the other side of applying this work and doing these worksheets, okay? Also, you need to do this with honesty and curiosity, not judgment, all right? There's a reason that you're believing the thoughts that you're believing that are creating results you don't want. So don't judge yourself. You just have to be curious about why you believe them. And the moment that you start judging yourself is the moment you lock access to doing thought work. Okay? So if you have a belief like vaping helps me deal with anxiety and you're mad at yourself for believing that, then ask yourself, with all compassion in the world, why do I believe that? A lot of our belief systems were formed, again, before we had the capacity to look at them, and they're typically formed to protect us from something. Although they're typically doing the opposite effect of protecting us, because we're addicted to nicotine, they were originally formed as a way to protect us. So don't be mad at yourself for having beliefs. Don't judge yourself. Look at it with honesty, curiosity, and compassion. Here we go. Remember that an unintentional thought or a thought error is a thought that we're believing, typically unconsciously, that stops us from getting a result we want, like quitting vaping. So the first unintentional thought is quitting vaping is hard. When you believe it is hard to do something, you absolutely and inevitably prove yourself right. Remember that thoughts are self-fulfilling prophecies and that they're optional. Quitting vaping is hard when you believe it's hard, and it's really hard to quit vaping without first changing your thoughts around vaping and nicotine. So let's look at this module. So here's the model. Circumstance, I decide to quit vaping tomorrow. Thought, quitting vaping is hard. Fear is your feeling because you're scared to do something you think is going to be really hard. The action is I avoid quitting until the right moment. I do this with air quotes because there is no right moment. I look for evidence that quitting will be hard. I thought loop on all of my failed attempts in the past, and I try to quit while thinking about and feeling how difficult it will be. Okay, so I'm still thinking and believing and feeling emotions that make it really difficult. Result, I make quitting vaping really hard. And if I believe quitting's hard, I might even vape just to prove myself correct. I would say that more often than not, that's the result of this thought. Remember that an intentional thought is one we choose on purpose to create a result that we want, okay? You don't have to choose this exact thought. This is an example for you. As long as you pick one that changes the result of you being addicted to nicotine, or you change the result of making it really hard to quit vaping, that's all good and dandy, okay? So choosing thoughts that serves you is a skill set that you're completely capable of learning and implementing so that your prefrontal cortex can take charge over your animal brain. Let's look at the model. Same circumstance as the last one. I decide to quit vaping tomorrow. Thought, I can quit vaping by managing my thoughts. All right, see how much better that feels than quitting vaping is hard? When I believe this thought, I feel determined. I manage my thinking while quitting. I make sure not to believe things that make vaping sound desirable. I let cravings be there without reacting to them or freaking out. My result, I'm finally able to quit vaping because my mind is on board with quitting. Okay? All right, if you're still believing that quitting is hard, by the way, from the last belief, I would really recommend that you complete that PDF and just try it out, okay? At least print it out, look at it. It's going to be very beneficial for you to actually apply that thought work. So the second unintentional thought is vaping helps with anxiety. This is a really, really common one that I see people struggle with. So when you use something that releases dopamine, the release of dopamine numbs the emotion by giving you that feel-good dopamine spike. Here's the caveat. Be very careful not to confuse numbing an emotion with processing it. Numbing an emotion does not solve the emotion. It simply covers it up temporarily, often leading to net negative results like addiction, weight gain, or credit card debt. Processing an emotion is a skill you will learn in the next module on emotions. Processing an emotion allows you to actually deal with it while also not leaving any net negative results in its wake. Processing an emotion is a far superior option. So let's look at this model again. Remember, this is a numbing model, okay? So in between the feeling and the action line here, there's another model that kind of sneaks in from an existing belief. Okay, so here's the the circumstance is rent's due tomorrow. I have a thought. I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. I feel anxiety. Remember, the anxiety is not being caused by your rent. It's being caused by your thought about it. There's a whole bunch of thoughts you can have about rent being due tomorrow. This one that you're choosing is creating anxiety. Okay, and then because I'm feeling anxious, I vape, I bite my nails, I thought loop on having no money, I eat food, I hyperventilate. So my result is I don't actually do anything to help me pay my rent. Because I think the optional thought, I don't know what to do, I end up acting in a way that doesn't give me any answers on what to do, okay? Now, in between feeling and action in this model, remember there's this model going on. So anxiety is the circumstance, and then I have a thought, ooh, vaping helps me with anxiety. Because I have that thought, I feel the desire to vape. And then I vape, and I vape to avoid my emotions. Remember, somebody who doesn't vape, who doesn't believe that drug addiction helps them with anxiety, they're not going to vape in this model. They have no reason to, right? Because when this belief isn't here, we don't use nicotine to numb our emotions, okay? The intentional thought here is being addicted to nicotine creates more anxiety, or you could just say being addicted to nicotine creates anxiety, which it does. Addiction works in a very simple and reliable way. Once we get addicted to something, whether it's vaping, porning, social mediaing, or eating, the way your brain and body encourage you to use again is by creating anxiety. So although vaping allows you to bury some pre-existing anxiety temporarily, it creates much more anxiety in the process because of its immensely powerful addictive properties. Remember when we talked about dopamine? The way that your body encourages you with a craving to use is by giving you a tiny spike and then you go below baseline. That below baseline feel is where you feel like crap. That's actually what drives you. That discomfort, that uncomfortable emotion drives you and creates all that havoc in your body to go and use again. So let's look at the model. Circumstances that you're anxious, okay? We're just going to put an emotion in the circumstance line. Now, the thought that you have about that is being addicted to nicotine creates more anxiety, okay? So now you're still feeling anxious. And this is where I want to really point this little laser pointer. It's like feeling anxious is okay sometimes. You don't need to get out of it. And we're going to learn about that in the next module, but it's okay to be anxious without needing to escape it. Actions. I sit with the emotion. I don't attempt to numb it or get away from it. My result is that I actually process my anxiety without using drugs. All right, so here's a little caveat. It is okay to use external things to help us deal with our emotions sometimes, but it's really important to recognize that those things do not solve emotional problems and almost always have net negative consequences that stop us from creating the lives we really want. If you're here, it's because you've come to the conclusion that nicotine addiction is hurting your life more than helping it. You can make an argument that nicotine addiction helps you with stress, focus, concentration, and anxiety just as well as a blackout drunk could make an argument that drinking helps him sleep more soundly. The simple truth is that drug addiction absolutely creates anxiety by its very nature, reduces your ability to focus or concentrate without the substance, and stresses you out so badly that you're willing to pay me money to help you get rid of it. Do not argue for thoughts that don't serve you unless you want a life that doesn't serve you. Final thought 3 is that vaping is safer than smoking. All right, so I just want to say this. This one is probably true. However, safer does not mean safe. Vaping is new, and I would imagine most of us can logically agree that vaping immense amounts of aerolized nicotine, along with various heavy metals, acids, artificial flavors, etc., into our lungs every 5 minutes, day after day, for years, is not going to add years to your life. So let's look at this model. I'm currently vaping. My thought is that vaping is safer than cigarettes. I feel justified vaping. This is so many people in the world right now, as they're very justified. Even though it's creating all these negative effects, they can feel like it is justifiable because it's quote unquote safer than another poison. My actions, I vape. I argue for it being safe. I stay addicted. I talk about how many chemicals don't exist in vaping but do in cigarettes. I look down on people and smoke. I think this is really funny that people who vape look down on people who smoke. It's like, come on, have some class. And your result is that I justify that my addiction is safer than another addiction. All right, now for all you contraries out there, here's a thought that you can just have instead of the whole vaping is safer than cigarettes argument. Intentional thought 3, I don't need nicotine to enjoy my life. What if we just stopped comparing one poison to another and we just talked about not doing it at all? Right? That's an actual thought that you could just practice believing. By the way, I believe that thought now. That's one of the main foundational thoughts that I believe that's helped me quit all of my nicotine addiction so that I don't go from patches to gum to lozenges back to Zyn pouches. Like, I just don't need nicotine to enjoy my life, okay? So when I think that and I'm currently vaping, I actually feel kind of torn. It's like a cognitive dissonance, right? Where I believe something that doesn't match my actions. I have two beliefs that don't match. So when I feel torn, I get really curious about why I'm vaping. I begin to pay attention to my body and mind when I vape, and I think about my life without nicotine. Result, I start to envision my life without nicotine. It's pretty cool, right? So this is an interesting model because of the emotion. Feeling torn is the emotion for cognitive dissonance, which can be defined as believing two or more contradicting beliefs at the same time. Cognitive dissonance when quitting or feeling torn is a really, really good sign that your beliefs are starting to shift. Remember that when your beliefs shift, your emotions shift. And when your emotions shift, your actions shift, leading to new results, like a life free of nicotine. Cognitive dissonance is a sign you're on the right path. Fourth unintentional thought error that keeps people vaping is that vaping helps me when I'm bored. I actually hear this one a lot. So the same logic from the anxiety belief can be applied here. The reason why I specifically chose to include a thought error about boredom in particular is because boredom is actually a very important emotion that a lot of people try really hard to avoid. In her book Dopamine Nation, Anna Lembke says that boredom is not just boring, it can also be terrifying. It forces us to come face to face with bigger questions of meaning and purpose, but boredom is also an opportunity for discovery and invention. It creates space necessary for a new thought to form, without which we're endlessly reacting to stimuli around us, rather than allowing us to be within our lived experience. I personally like sitting in boredom because it's there where I can make decisions on what I like and what I don't like about my life. Numbing boredom with nicotine allows us to numb over things about our lives that we're not too happy with. Removing the nicotine, face the boredom, and things start to change for the better really, really fast. So let's look at the model. Circumstance, I'm bored. Thought, vaping helps me when I'm bored. I feel craving, desire to vape. I vape. when I think I'm bored, I use fake dopamine hits to feel entertained. Okay. So again, boredom is really, really important, and boredom is a gift. I kind of led into this intentional thought. What if you just believe that boredom is a gift? This is really cool. Okay, so let's look at the circumstance. I'm bored. My thought is that boredom's a gift. I feel peaceful. Can you actually feel peaceful sitting in boredom? What if you did? What if you just felt bored sitting in boredom? Just something to consider. So my action is I sit in boredom, I contemplate, I reach into the depths of the all and pull from it something marvelous and creative that's unlike anything the world has ever seen. I download that $1 million business idea. Result, I learn things about myself and my life with sitting in boredom. Okay? Remember, boredom is an absolute gift. Boredom is where I actually have to sit down and face the things I'm not happy about in life and look at the things that I do want. It's in the boredom that actually all of my dreams have come from, and I intentionally foster boredom in my life now. And this is a really good time to just bring in meditation. If you're ever like really having trouble sitting in boredom, I recommend that you meditate, because that forces you to come face to face with some boredom, and that's a really, really good thing. Unintentional thought number 5 is that quitting involves suffering. So this is an interesting one to look at. I personally define suffering as something that happens in your mind with your thoughts. I believe that pain and discomfort are normal, but that suffering comes from believing things that make us experience suffering. Quitting vaping only involves suffering if you choose to believe it does. It may be uncomfortable to sit with emotions and cravings that you've never sat with before, but suffering is not the same as pain and discomfort. And you should know that discomfort is truly the currency of your dreams. So it's best not to confuse the two. So let's look at this model. My circumstances, I quit vaping 2 days ago. We could even say I quit vaping 3 days ago. So you're in the peak of withdrawal symptoms from the physical, okay? Now my thought is that quitting vaping involves suffering. I'm feeling angst, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling fear and paranoia and shame and all these negative emotions. But let's say in this model with this sentence, I feel angst, which is kind of like a grasping and a more intense version of anxiety. It's like a little more physical of an emotion. So my actions when I'm in angst, I fight the cravings, I argue with myself, I believe every painful thought that comes into my mind, I choose to think quitting is hard, I bite my nails, I pray for the misery to end. And my result is I make quitting vaping full of suffering. Okay? So I just want to offer that discomfort is normal. Suffering is part of the sloppiness that comes from not managing our thoughts and our emotions. Our intentional thought for this one is that quitting vaping does involve some physical discomfort and some mental emotional discomfort. Okay? So, this is the circumstance. I quit vaping 2 days ago, same circumstance. My thought is that quitting vaping does involve some physical and emotional discomfort. Feeling acceptance. I sit with mild discomforts of emotional and physical withdrawal. I try to manage vaping and withdrawal thoughts. I do not choose to believe things that make it unbearable. My result is I prove to myself I can do uncomfortable things. Okay? When you quit vaping, you're not going to be able to manage every single possible thought that comes in your head. You can manage a lot of them, and that's what it takes to quit vaping. You don't have to manage every single thought that's ever in your head, okay? But there are going to be emotional discomforts when you quit vaping, because you're no longer using vaping to avoid certain emotions that are normal, okay? So you're still going to feel those emotions, and you won't have an escape route with a false hit of dopamine. And there's going to be some emotional and mental and physical discomfort that comes with quitting, okay? There's no problem with that. It's when we try not to feel uncomfortable, that's why we vape in the first place, right? If you imagine that you need to feel comfortable all the time and that discomfort's bad, you end up being an addict, and then you end up in a lot more discomfort anyways. So when you just accept that discomfort's a normal part of life, and it's a very normal part of quitting something that is releasing a lot of dopamine, then you are allowed to be in acceptance, and you get through it just fine without fighting yourself or trying to be happy and feel good all the time. All right, and finally, unintentional thought number 6 is that I am a vapor. Okay, this one may seem obvious, but if you're still struggling with vaping, it isn't so obvious to your brain yet that you aren't a vapor. When you choose to identify as someone who vapes, well, you end up vaping. The same thing happens when you throw any title on yourself, because the model is always working like that. If you are vaping, there is, with certainty, still a part of you that's identifying with being a vapor. How do I know that? You're still vaping. So let's look at this model. I quit vaping this morning. I still think that I'm vaping or a vapor. I feel torn. I look for reasons why quitting is hard. I look for reasons to feel vaping FOMO. I argue with my reasons for quitting. I sabotage and discount any of my success I have with quitting, and I look for reasons to vape again. My result is I remain a vapor. Okay? One of the worst things someone can do when trying to change their belief and their identity and their behavior is identify with someone who is in their past behaviors. If you want to quit vaping, you have to start seeing yourself as a non-vapor. This means you'll have to intentionally envision and imagine how your life will be once you quit. What will have to change? How will you think about and talk about vaping to yourself? What will you think when somebody else is around you vaping, or when you feel anxiety? In order to become a non-vapor, you have to think like a non-vapor, not like a vapor who is refraining from nicotine. Here's a really good thought to get rid of the I'm a vapor thought. The life I deserve does not have room for addiction. So let's look at this model. The circumstances I quit vaping this morning, my thought is the life I deserve does not have room for addiction. I'm feeling sure, grounded, secure, okay? My actions, I take deep breaths when I'm feeling a craving come on. I repeat to myself my thought. I intentionally envision a better life post addiction. I envision myself a year from now saying, thank you for the life you gifted me to myself. And my result is I'm a badass who gets through addiction. Okay? So this is the thought I use to really reinforce my quitting. I sat down one day, I took out a piece of paper, and I decided to create a dream that would give me a reason to not want to vape anymore. I wrote down things like I want abs, I want a business, I want to make $1 million a year, I want a house in Michigan that I could rent out, and I want to be able to afford to live anywhere in the world. I want to work from home and help people with their mental health. I want a boyfriend who also owns a business and we can work and grow together. I want a really nice car and I don't want to feel guilty about having it. I want to buy my parents a house so they can stop worrying so much about money. When I looked at this list, I noticed something really strange. There was a pattern. Pretty much every single thing I wanted on this list came from one central desire for the emotion of freedom. Drug addiction is the opposite of freedom. I realized if I was going to give myself a shot at the life I really wanted, I was absolutely going to have to quit vaping. That vision made it much easier to apply the uncomfortable thought and emotional work it takes to end an addiction. Okay, when you have a compelling vision for a better life and you believe in that life and you see that the thing you're doing right now is just stopping you dead in your tracks from achieving that life, it becomes much easier and much more the right option to quit an addiction like nicotine. All right, so I know that I've given you a lot of exercises in this module, but please, this is the kind of work that gets you inspired and gives you the huge why so that you can quit vaping for good. So this is an interesting little exercise to do. Spend about 15 to 20 minutes brainstorming what your life would look like if you could have anything you've ever wanted, okay? Get crazy. There are no limits in this exercise except for the laws of nature. Who would you have to become to create this life? What thoughts would you have to believe? What emotions would you feel if you got all of it? What actions would you take or not take? When you're done, ask yourself where vaping fits into this, okay? Again, when you have a compelling vision for the future that's better than the current reality of the present, it becomes much easier to stop doing things that take you further away from that vision. So this exercise is really powerful because it shows you that vaping and addiction does not align with who you want to become and probably not even with who you currently are. I recommend pausing this video and doing this exercise. Take 15 to 30 minutes to plan the life you want. Be ridiculous and have fun with this. Like, this is your dream life, okay? Nothing's impossible if you align your thoughts and your actions to it. Then ask yourself where vaping fits in. And if it doesn't fit into your life, tell yourself why. Use this really powerful fuel for quitting vaping and get really specific and get detailed. This should be, again, a really fun exercise that gets you really creative and shows you that you actually have so much more to live for than sitting down, sucking on a stick of nicotine that isn't serving you in any way, shape, or form. There are a ton of other thoughts that keep people vaping, but the most important thing is that you understand it's your optional thoughts about vaping, not anything factual or circumstantial that has created your addiction and keeps you vaping. If you want to quit vaping, you have to change your thoughts. The self-coaching model is a beautiful and simple way to show you specifically how your thoughts are creating your addiction. And by trying out new thoughts, kind of like you're trying on new clothes, you can see how your life would change if your thoughts change. As a final note, sometimes it's best not to go from one thought to another, like it's complete opposite, because your brain won't believe it. In cases like these, it's best to try on a smaller shift. Maybe to go from I like vaping to I don't like vaping is too big. How about you could try I don't always have to like vaping, something like that. When you change your thoughts, you change your emotion, therefore changing your actions and results. Even small changes in your thoughts and emotions can be remarkably powerful. Your brain works best by repetition. Repeat something enough and you start to believe it. It seriously is that simple. You don't have to overcomplicate it. In the next section, we're going to talk about your emotions because they're an important thing to understand when it comes to addiction. But remember, your thoughts create your emotions, so they will ultimately be the most important piece of your quitting journey. Now, the final thing I want to throw in here before the next section is I included a bonus ebook called 15 Beliefs That Changed My Life, or 15 Beliefs That Made Me a Non-Vapor, something like that. It's attached to the right side of this video, and it's just a ebook with 15 belief shifts that I've made, kind of similar to the examples we just did, but there's about 9 additional ones, and I tell stories from my own life for each one. It's just a bonus value add for you in case you're having trouble changing your thoughts or you want to do more examples of thought work. Okay? I'll see you in the next section on emotions.